Welcome everyone to the On Time On Target Financial Thought Leader Series. It's my privilege today to bring to you Burke Speed, who's a friend of mine from the Air Force. We were fighter pilots together. We worked together in the same squadron as a leadership team, which was a true privilege. And I retired, and Burke continued on to a distinguished career where you heard in his bio, he retired at 06. And then what surprised me, because I never knew this was coming, the next thing I heard after his retirement was, I've got a book. So I was like, what a fantastic story. And that's how Burke fits into the overall leadership series. Is some other folks have talked about they have a book, but it wasn't like to make money. It wasn't, it was more of the advanced business card to be able to hand out at seminars and kind of distribute sort of thing. But here we have a fiction author, which I can't even imagine because my imagination is not that good. So let's hand it over to Burke. And Burke, why don't you tell us a little about your backstory up and through college, and then we'll go from there. So over to you.
Okay, thanks, Cruiser. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on today. Born and raised in South Mississippi, just a bit of a country boy, as it were. Raised in South Mississippi, which is not that terribly different from North Mississippi, but we're somewhat proud of, sort of like Texans, very, very proud of where we're from. Went to Mississippi State University with a background, basically a faith-filled background, if you want to call it that, active in the Baptist Student Union and college, and graduated from Mississippi State in 1992. The Air Force was going through a big transition at the time, so it took about a year before they called me to active duty after that. But when they did, I was very fortunate to leave Mississippi State as a second lieutenant and go out to Wichita Falls, Texas for Euro-NATO joint jet pilot training to try to earn my wings.
Right. So right out of college, and then I had a year myself that I had to spend finding some other work before they called me, and I was a year ahead of you there, down to Del Rio for me. So I hear the Mississippi, the strong Mississippi theme, and I eventually met Burke where we were on a leadership team in Mississippi. So kind of a homecoming for him. And of course, I was born in Alabama. So one thing we got to do together is talk SEC football. Burke had me as a guest. He had season tickets for Mississippi State, had myself and one of my daughters as guests over there. So I had some really, really amazing times. But let's transition into, as a fellow fighter pilot, obviously you went off to pilot training, did some good work, and off into the fighters, and then of course retired at 06. And we could talk for hours of all the contributions you made to your country during that time. But tell us about a few highlights of your military service.
Well, it may sound a little cliche, but a book that I was given when I was getting done with F-16 training. Of course, Dr. Seuss, one of the best authors of all time. Oh, the places you go.
Yeah.
I think that was probably one of the best parts of the whole thing is the adventure, the newness, the places I went. I'm born and raised, like I said, in Mississippi. I think by the time I left college, I'd left the country one time for about a week, and that was it. Fast forward a few years, or quite a few years, and lived, spent in terms of years in Korea and Japan, and ended up 9 years in Europe, and throw in all the trips to other spots, some glamorous, some not quite so glamorous. Very privileged to get to fly fighters like Cruiser for quite a few years. Really a great time. It really pushed me to be better at everything, more so than anything in my life up to that point. One of a couple of other opportunities that came up during this time, I never would have expected. It's one of those strange things, you go into work one day. I've been flying for about 10 years straight, going to the office at Ramstein in Ramstein, Germany, and brand new guy just showed up, and it's right before Operation Iraqi Freedom is about to kick off. And one of the guys I've just met walked in and says, "Hey, has anyone here ever been a forward air controller?" Which, yeah, you see, I
sink into the woodwork.
Yeah, I'm like, from the air, and he's like, "Awesome, perfect. You're going with Special Forces guys. We'll see you when the war's over." So I spent not too long, a few months, couple of months with Special Forces guys in the opening days of Operation Iraqi Freedom. I'm no cool dude. I got to hang out with some pretty cool dudes, and it was just real eye-opening. So it was quite an experience. Things I never thought I would see or do or be a part of, I got to be a part of through the Air Force. So I guess that would be my theme for the career. Was it was never quite what I thought it was going to be, but it always in some ways turned out to be more. Right.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Our experiences are almost 180 out because I visited every place you named, but I was there for a couple of weeks instead of most of my career. Right. I spent over half of my career in the Alabama, Mississippi, northern Florida little triangle there. So now Burke mentioned something interesting. You know, you talked about, he's calling me Cruiser because that's like how we knew each other. I'm actually having to force myself to call him Burke during the time because I was sitting in the chair in a command position at Mississippi, and I you know, boss calls me up and says, I've got a new DO inbound for you, and which is again the second part of your leadership team, a COO, where I was a CEO, if you will, in civilian terms. And I'm like, oh yeah, and of course I get his file and everything's amazing. And then I hear this call sign is Disco, and I was like, well, you know, I was that just brought the smile to my face that I'm getting right now, is because when a guy has a call sign of Disco, it's just like I'm so excited to meet somebody with that call sign because that's so much fun. But yeah, that's why we use these call signs. We know each other by call sign and not really first name much at all. And some people carry that off in retirement. So it's good stuff. But thank you for sharing about your career. And again, thank you for your service. Again, very distinguished. And it was a pleasure working with you during the little bit of time that I had with you, maybe a year. So let's transition to what everybody wants to hear about as far as what we can take away from the leadership series is writing a book. So the book is Evocatus. And I looked up they're right at the beginning, I think, is what does that word mean? But I'm not going to spoil that. Plus, I would probably butcher the exact story. But I got that far. I haven't read it yet, so shame on me. I'm going to read it over the big weekend coming up. But let's hand it over to you, Burke, and talk about, you know, what inspired you to do it. When did you actually start? How long did it take? You can basically just start kind of educating someone that's listening today what's the experience like. So go ahead.
Well, I'll say this up front. You know, in retrospect, I'm probably the epitome of, in some ways, of how not to do things. I just sort of stumbled into this, and have had to try to work pretty hard to catch up in some areas, but been shown a lot of grace and help along the way. So about this actually goes back to when we were in Columbus together, not long before we left. I had begun to have a series of dreams. I know that also can sound a little cliche, but we're often inspired in the strangest.
You're not on flight status anymore, so we don't have to ground you for saying stuff like that. So.
Yeah, exactly. It was a real dream, but you know, a series of dreams that were just difficult to get out of my head, honestly. And the more I thought about it, the more it sort of began to morph into a story. And I'll be the first to say, you know, like Steve was saying earlier, that, you know, surprised to see your book. No one was more surprised than I when I began to write it, to be real honest about it. I've never considered myself a writer. I have never really sat down and go, you know, one day when I grow up, I want to be a writer. That's not really how my mindset has worked. But right. I got this idea stuck in my head. And I kept sort of putting it off, thinking, well, it's just, don't worry about it. I kept telling myself, you're not a writer, let it go, just carry on. And I just couldn't put it down. So a few years later, we had moved to Germany, and I was doing as we call a staff tour, just doing paperwork for a long time every day. Right. Finally, I just sat down and said, okay, well, let me just see if I can just get all the stuff that's in my head out on paper. And over about a 3-week period, I sort of mentally barfed out the story, right, and in its generalist terms. So I sort of put it out there and went, okay, well, there's something. What do we think? And my poor wife, Carroll, she's had to put up with, you know, iteration after iteration after iteration. And for a long time, I sort of would run by her, and she would look at it and go, yeah, it's okay, hon. You know, sort of the pat on the back, you know, nice work, good job. Right. And finally, I got the courage to approach a couple of editors. And I'll pause here to say that if you want to write a book, especially a work of fiction, your choice of editor can make or break you.
Okay.
And that's if there's one of the big centers of gravity, again, to use another one of those thrown around military terms,
right.
The editor really makes a difference, especially if you're someone like me that doesn't have a deep background in editing and that sort of thing. So the first editor I went to, he helped out, and he was a good guy, but he more so helped out on just some structure. And so finally, I sort of sat back and did what I should have done a little earlier and gone, all right, start with the end in mind. Where do I want this to go? Who is the story intended for? Who would be best to take a look at this to try to see if there's anything to it and can make it better? So I found an editor in Florida who was willing to work with me on going back and forth on this. And so I sent her the draft, and I had worked on this and cleaned it up best I could, and I thought it was pretty good. And talk about and bless my heart, man. You talk about the fighter pilot debrief. She was sort of like, okay, yeah, nice effort, good job, and just up one side and down the other, and how it was just not good. And just sort of, and I, to be fair, and I was like, all right, think clearly, look at it, see what she has to say. And I had to agree with her. I go, yeah, I see what you're saying. And her basic themes were good story, but your writing isn't very good. Sort of in simplest terms. And I went, well, okay, I don't really know where do I go from here? She said, okay, here's some resources. Right. Here's some things you might would have, she wouldn't say it like this, but maybe you should have done up front. Here's your research. Here's, if you want to be a writer, here's some ideas. If you want to write this genre, here's some things you should keep in mind. And so basically she sent me back to the drawing board.
Right.
I worked on it for about another year because for those who are in the mindset that you can write quickly and write well, it's sort of, again, one of those now, you can do one or the other. You can write quickly or well. It's not going to have, unless you're that 0.01% of the population, it's just not going to happen.
Right. That's crazy.
So I spent another year on it, worked on it, everything she told me to. I sent it back to her. She was very impressed. Hey, much better, still lacking something. And I looked at what she wrote, and I had to agree. I said, well, yeah, I see what you mean. So I mean, it was good. It wasn't a bad product, but it was good. So I sat back for another year, and this is where, I'll touch on the faith thing a little bit, and I know that may not be for everyone out there, but I'll throw this out, how this sort of played out for me, is that, so now you're talking number of years are passing by here, and that may or may not be typical, but we made some big decisions based on our faith, and I didn't hear voices, so again, don't send me back to the flight dock right now. But, I felt like God was like, all right, give it another try. So I sat down and went, okay, I don't know how to do this any better, but I'll give it one more try. And I started all the way back at the beginning and basically started rewriting again.
Oh, wow.
And this after, thousands of hours of time on this thing. And I took the first couple of chapters to Carroll and my wife, and she looked at it and went, this is what it was missing. So I basically finished that iteration and began to, once I thought I was done, and then sent it back to the editor one more time.
Right.
Who tidied it up yet again and said, okay, well, I think this is about as good as you can make it, and I really like it like this. So now you're ready to move forward.
Okay.
A couple of things I would point out to, because at this juncture I had to make a choice, either self-publish or try to get a traditional publishing company to publish the work. A couple of notes on each, and this is something that I've just sort of learned from the process, is the good news is it's easier now than ever if you want to publish a book. Okay. It is absolutely easy. And you can do it fairly well with a low-ish budget. And by low-ish, I mean, you can get some good review and editing for probably a couple of $1,000, depending on who you go to.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's really easy to publish a book right now. So there's like literally 8 million books out.
Right.
And thousands of books a day come out. So you're faced with the quandary of, do I publish it myself and get it out there a lot easier, a lot more quickly than traditional? And now everything's on me to get the word out, try to get it to the population, et cetera, versus traditional publishing, although that market is evolving a little bit as well. They tend to help you a lot more with the process, with artwork and getting your ISBNs and the things that some other companies will do, but they'll help you with that. And they also help you more so than if you were on your own with marketing and publicity and distribution, that sort of thing.
Okay. What if it is a financial show? So kind of thinking, first of all, using an editor, is that an hourly thing? Is it a page thing, or is it every time you hit send, is they just adding to the invoice that they're going to bill you at the end? Kind of we don't need the actual numbers of what it costs, but how does the process work for somebody?
Most of them charge by the word. By the word. So, and honestly, that's how most of these novels are marketed. Hey, we need a minimum of 70,000, maximum of 100,000 words.
Okay.
Depending on what genre and thing you're going for. So the nice part is you can do the math pretty quickly and go, okay, this is how much it's going to cost me. I probably spent close to $3,000 just on editing by the time it was over. Now, I am a Mississippi boy, and for all that denotes, and I am not an English major, so it's feasible that someone who does have a deep background in English and in publishing might be able to do it for a little less, but I think that's fairly reasonable.
Well, 3,000 doesn't sound, I mean, it's a lot of money, but it doesn't sound, undoable or whatever. And then, okay, how about the publisher? Did you go with a publishing then with the big house? And was that a big fee up front, or how did the money work with that?
Yeah, great question. The difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing, the lines have gotten really blurred over the last number of years. There's a lot of hybrid entities in between. So in its purest form, a traditional publisher does not charge you anything. You sign a contract with them. They have their stipulations. You work with them on publicity and different things, but otherwise they handle the cost and publish it for you. So if you've gotten it that far, and they accept it because it is very, very competitive.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Ostensibly, there's not much cost involved after that. Now, and that's not completely true, but that's sort of the general rule. Whereas on the self-publishing, it's all on you. Every bit of the publicity, distribution, however you choose to do it, it's all on you. In my particular case, it is a fairly small publishing company. Has a headquarters in Northern Ireland and here on the East Coast. Ambassador International, and I really appreciate them taking a chance on me, because that's sort of the thing. When you're an unproven entity, they're really taking the chance of bringing you on board. So go ahead.
I was just saying, how'd you find them? Is this like an internet search and try to find somebody that's in your wheelhouse of price and what they do, or?
Also a great question. That's what I did at first. I just did internet searches. And thankfully, though, I eventually found a book written by a publisher in Phoenix who specializes in this genre, basically speculative fiction. It doesn't have to be religious, but basically family-friendly speculative fiction, if you want to call it that. And he has a book that laid out every publisher, every publishing house, editors, agents, and sort of gave their specialty and things like that. He didn't rate them, but it's all in one book, and it comes out once a year. So I went through that basically end to end, and that helped me narrow down my search to a couple that I thought would be interested in the novel, and then at least not significantly change the message of the novel, because that's something people need to realize too, is that if you sign a traditional contract, with a traditional publishing house is the moment you sign that contract, you better be careful of the contract because you're handing over the work and they have a lot of say, or at least a lot of influence on what happens with the story from there.
I could see that could be a rookie move for sure. If you don't know what you're getting into there and you think that they're helping you out, but if they change your theme or the intent of it, then that'd be a big deal. And then, so now that the book is out and it's been out for 2 or 3 days, if my math is right, I already have mine in the mail. So I know you did like a big launch and stuff. How do you feel? Talk to me about the emotions from the perspective of it's done and now I'm in the marketing / sales phase. Is it you sleep better at night now, or how would you describe it?
Well, I equated this not long ago, although with having a baby. You know, I've not had one of my own, at least not that way. But after having 3 children of our own, there is a lot of preparation, a lot of thought, and the closer the day gets, the more you're ready for the day to get here. And then when the day gets here, you realize that it's just beginning.
Right.
So what I'm realizing is that I've shifted from let's get the book out the door to let's connect, you know, with people who might be interested in this. Let's see people who might like the story and carry it forward. And for the people who have encouraged me, you know, there's a lot of thanks to go around, and I've sent novels to different people. So we're sort of just shifting gears from let's get the book out to now let's get the message out and see how far it goes and see if it resonates with the crowd writ large.
All right. And is this the first of a series, or what's one and done? You kind of like having kids, right? Same sort of decision. Yeah. What are your thoughts as far as some more writing in your future?
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, the first days of having that baby and you're up all night going, you know, wow, I can't imagine ever doing this again. I'm at the, wow, I don't know what happens after this. Whereas this story, again, to be fair, has been in the works for years. I actually have the framework and opening chapters of the sequel on the shelf.
All right.
To be perfectly honest, part of me is waiting to see how well this was received, because if there's lots of enthusiasm and there's a lot of desire for a sequel, then I can probably, you know, we'll keep it going. And if it's not, it's okay. It's been a great journey, and I'm glad we've done it. And I hope the people that read it get a lot out of it.
Oh, very nice. Well, I'm excited if certainly there's a sequel out there. And one thing I meant to ask along the way is I obviously love the cover art, very kind of masculine, military, you know, the dark cover of the book. So I think it's themed perfectly. How much input did you have in that, or is it you sent it off and somebody came back and kind of gave you some ideas to choose from, or gave you your opinion? How'd that work?
Well, it's actually, I ended up having a lot of influence. Now, this publishing company, and I think most do, is they ask for your input. What kind of cover do you want? And what kinds of covers would you comparatively, do you think you want it to come out like? So if you have some favorite covers that you always love, then that's what I did. Is I said, I like simple, I like this, and so this is what I'm looking for. And it turns out that I had found some artwork that ended up being used for the cover. I didn't know that's how it was going to go at the time, but when they looked at what I wanted and sort of where I was going with the theme, they took that and used it, and we were very, very pleased with how the cover came out. Well,
yeah, I think it, as simple as it is, simple is elegant too. Certainly when I've looked at my own branding and things, it's like, it seems like the tendency is to try to do too much. So I think it hits the mark perfectly. So as far as your experience, and again, for the listeners out there, if you're considering writing fiction, which I have to imagine is way different than nonfiction, Burke, what would you tell either your younger self or a room full of people that if you put up a webinar now that said, are you having dreams? Are you going to try to turn these dreams into a book? Well, tune in at this time, and here's what I would advise you. So how about for somebody out there considering this journey, what would you offer them?
Well, I guess I would offer a few things. One is start with the end in mind. And I know that's not always clear. And again, in my case, I'm not sure I did things quite the standard way or always the right way, but I started with a gut feeling, and it eventually turned into, yeah, I think I know where I want this to go. I want this to turn into a story that delves a bit into veterans, into some of the struggles that we face, into life transitions, whether we saw them coming or not, and where we find our meaning and our hope, and sort of a bit of encouragement. So start with the end in mind. I would also have done a little bit or a lot more research into, okay, if I want to write a work of fiction, that's great, but fiction is a huge area. You have to sort of narrow it down a little bit. What is your audience? And start tailoring your story and the way you write and the way you publish the book towards that audience. So start with end in mind, do your research ahead of time. And then I guess the last thing would be this is, like having a baby, there are some days you're ecstatic and you just know this is going to be the most awesome thing ever. And other days you're terrified, and you're going, what am I doing? I'm putting something out there that, that means a lot to me, and anyone can just do whatever they want to with it.
Right.
But like a lot of other things in life, you have to, again, not to be cliche, but be brave. If there's a story you want to put out, if it's meaningful to you, it's likely to be very meaningful to a number of other people. And I guess the last thing I would add is do the old checkup from the neck up. As always, why are we doing what are we doing? And there's not necessarily a wrong answer to that. But if you're doing it to make money, which is great because we all have to, then you need to look at it in those terms and what's your best chance for making money. If you wanted to reach a specific part of the population, then you're going to have to tailor your efforts towards that to make sure, like in my case, I didn't want the story to get hijacked and turned into something that I didn't want it to get turned into. So I chose to go a path that I may not make as much money, I may not get as much distribution, but I think they'll stay true to the story, which was what was important to me. So you have to sort of know why you're doing what you're doing and stick with it from that perspective.
Yeah, well, I appreciate those words, and I think and certainly the candor of talking about the highs and the lows. All I've really ever written is theses and things like that, and those are painful enough, and they're a fraction of the size of the work that you produced. So thank you for that. Now we're going to kind of move on to where if you wanted to offer up, how can folks find more about the book or find more about you? And also, I haven't really asked you if you have a little sizzle paragraph about what the book's about, or now's your time. So brag about your book and where they can go to buy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Probably the best tagline I can tell you is that the story is about Jamie, and Jamie is a reluctant veteran who's recruited to fight an enemy unlike anything he's ever seen. The story takes place in Columbus, Mississippi, where we meet each other. And down the road. So a lot of the places and faces are very familiar, but it cuts right to the heart of Jamie. And Jamie is a pararescueman who got injured during a story that's told in the book. And he got sort of unceremoniously put to the curb by the Air Force. And so he's sort of trying to figure out where to go with his life and what to do, and just trying to sort of make things happen when some really strange things start happening. So if I were to describe it outside of the actual storyline, I would say it would be a humorous modern day action adventure with just a little bit of otherworldliness thrown in.
There you go. Sounds like it needs to be made into a movie after 1 million book sales, right? So, so how can folks find it? Just Amazon, or do you have a website, or what would you like to pass on there?
A few different places. I mean, the top one's Amazon. You can put in Evocatus. It should come right up, or Evocatus Burke Speed. And you've got Kindle version, paperback version. We're working on the audio version. So that's the easiest way. There's also a trailer that we made, a book trailer. You can find it at the same place there on my author page on Amazon. If you don't have or don't want to use Amazon, burkspeed.com. So one word, burkspeed.com. You can also sort of get a little bit more of the backstory. You can sign up for my mailing list, get the first 3 chapters for free, see if you like it before you ever spend any money on it. The trailer, I think we've also put the trailer there as well. And last but not least, Facebook, there is a Burke Speed author Facebook page. That I'm regularly posting events, things that are going on, where we'll be. We're going to do some signings in the future. COVID has sort of rolled into everyone's plans a little bit, but we're working around that the best we can. So I'd say Amazon and then burkspeed.com, and then last but not least, Facebook, Burke Speed author, best places to find me.
All right. Well, hey, I appreciate that, and thank you so much for coming on. I'm proud of proud to have served with you, proud to be your friend, and proud of your latest accomplishment, and excited to see where this one goes, as well as maybe any potential sequels out there. So thanks for coming on today.
Thanks so much, Steve. I appreciate you letting me be here.
You bet. So for our listeners out there, you've heard an amazing story from how it all started, which is probably not what you had expected as far as the storyline, all the way through the process, the highs and the lows. So hopefully you learned a lot from that. And again, you have the resources at your fingertips now if you want to reach out to Burke. And he talked about a lot of doing research and stuff ahead of time that you should have done. So maybe that's a question if you're thinking of embarking on this journey. But with that, I'll leave you guys for today. Thanks for listening in. Here's to you being on time, on target with your financial and career goals. Talk to you next time.